Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and also welcome to those of you joining from my article over on Forbes as well. And today we are finally able to review the RTX 3060 Ti from Nvidia. It's brand new mid-range card which is set to retail for $400. So a whole bunch of stuff we need to do here then today, which is looking at the gaming performance, of course, and also comparing it to some key players in the market as well, where graphics cards come in, specifically some key models. And we will be comparing it against a whole bunch of stuff, including the RTX 3070, which obviously retails for around $100 more. Is it worth $100 more, or should you go for the RTX 3060 Ti instead? And also previous cards in Nvidia's range, such as the RTX 2080 Super. Nvidia claims this card is as fast, if not faster than that card in games, which is saying something. And also the RTX 2080 as well. So it depends on where you are in the world as to whether those cards are actually available and how much they are. That goes the same pretty much for every single card out there at the moment, especially where the latest ones are concerned. In terms of comparisons with AMD though, we don't really have one at the moment. So the RX 5700 XT is obviously one of the more powerful ones out there, below the RX 6800 of course. But that's not really designed to go up against this card. It was designed to go up against the RTX 2070 Super. And of course, the RTX 2070 Super is a whole lot less powerful than what Nvidia is touting this graphics card at. So you're talking about an entire sort of tier of graphics cards lower. And as a result, given that the RX 6800 is a lot more expensive and designed to compete with the RTX 3070, there isn't really a competitor from AMD for this card at the moment. Obviously, rumors of 6700 XT and that kind of stuff are abound at the moment, and that is probably what we will have to wait for an alternative to the RTX 3060 Ti. But a lot going for this card though. The 60 series cards, 960, 1060, 2060 Super, all excellent graphics cards from Nvidia. They've been very, very popular. The 1060, of course, is still topping it out in the or topping a lot of the charts, shall I say, in the Steam hardware survey. So that was a very, very successful card from Nvidia. From lots of points of view, it was good for cryptocurrency mining as well. But there's also lots of them in the Steam hardware survey. So a lot riding on this card then. It's potentially an excellent graphics card for $400, especially if it performs as well, if not better, than the 2080 Super. So looking at the actual graphics card itself, $400 as I mentioned, and we're dealing with a very, very similar card in terms of looks and TDP and everything else to the RTX 3070. We've got the twin fan design. You've also got the flow-through fan at the top as well. And that will mean that you'll need to factor that into your airflow, as particularly important if you've got a small form factor case, as some of my other testing has shown. And in terms of ventilation, well, you're going to get air kind of coming at all different directions with this graphics card. You've got vents on the sides, as you can see. You've also got vents over the top. You've got the vent on the rear, and also you have a large mesh vent on the end of the PCI Express bracket as well. So an interesting card to deal with. And the next thing we need to one thing I was going to mention is the power connector. I nearly forgot that. Standard 12 pin that is included in the box with the extension cable. Love it or hate it. It is included and you will need to use it. And on the other end of that is required a single 8-pin power connector. So that's what you're looking at with this card. It's pretty much identical in terms of size to the RTX 3070 as well. But the main difference really is that you've got more of a silver finish here rather than the kind of gunmetal grey of the RTX 3070. Not entirely sure which one I prefer. Maybe the gunmetal grey. I think it's kind of a very silvery finish. But it's still no less attractive. You've still got these nice beveled edges. It's a quality feeling graphics card, got some weight to it as well. And around the far side then, you can see you've got a mixture of, single HDMI port and 3 HDMI, display ports. I'll get it right in a minute, goodness gracious. Yeah, just the single model name there, RTX 3060 Ti. So very, very similar then in aesthetics and cooler design to the RTX 3070. So what we need to do now then is talk about the specifications. So compared to the RTX 3070 then, which is kind of the main competitor in terms of specifications and price, I guess, in terms of current generation graphics cards. And we've got the CUDA core count sitting at 4,864 versus 5,888. So around 1,000 more CUDA cores for the 3070 versus the 3060 Ti. Tensor cores, we are looking at 152 versus 184, so that's generally what you'd expect given the price. RT cores then, 38 versus 46. So again, a reasonable amount more RT cores for the 3070, and all that may very well end up giving it a bit of an edge over the 3060 Ti at higher resolutions, especially when ray tracing is enabled. However, you do get the same 8GB of GDDR6 memory, and also the same 256-bit memory bus. So all in all, a very, very similar card in many ways, and the TDP just 20 watts higher for the RTX 3070. We're also dealing with a 2-slot card, and both cards use that single 8-pin power connector, which converts to the 12-pin on the card itself. So that is the specifications talked about then. Very, very similar card in many ways to the RTX 3070, but let's take a look at those performance numbers. Okay, so our first game test then is Metro Exodus at 1080p with ray tracing enabled, and obviously DLSS not having much of an impact here, and we are looking at the RTX 3060 Ti managing a minimum 99th percentile of 43 frames per second and average of 78. And that's not a million miles away from the likes of the RX 6800 and RTX 3070, but in percentage terms, that it is a reasonable amount. 43 up to 49 is obviously well over 10%. And yeah, so if you're aiming for 1080p here, you do generally get more for your money. Stepping up to 1440p though, and disabling ray tracing, and the RTX 3060 Ti sandwiches itself in between the 2080 Super and 2080, and the RX 6800 leaps forwards with a much faster minimum and average on the 99th percentiles. The RTX 3070, again, noticeably quicker, a minimum 99th percentile of 47 frames per second versus 42. So again, the RTX 3070 generally justifying the extra outlay there. So moving on and enabling ray tracing next in Metro Exodus at 1440p, and we see it again sandwiched between the RTX 2080 Super and 2080, so a reasonable result there. Not quite bettering the 2080 Super as some of Nvidia's claims portrayed, but there is a very good result here against the RX 6800, which was actually slower on the average frame rate than the 3060 Ti, thanks to DLSS playing a part. And moving on to 4K then, and with ray tracing disabled, again, RTX 3060 Ti sandwiched between the 2080 Super and the 2080. But with ray tracing disabled, the RX 6800 pulls miles ahead with a minimum 99th percentile of 38 versus 29 for the 3060 Ti. The RTX 3070, a reasonable amount quicker, but only just above 10%, 34 minimum versus 29 minimum on the 3060 Ti. Again, if you're gaming at 4K and you're playing a lot of Metro Exodus, you're going to want to step up to something such as the RX 6800 XT or the RTX 3080. But of course, moving on to the next graph, you've got ray tracing enabled, and that again gives Nvidia a big lead over AMD, and you've got the RTX 3060 Ti outperforming the RX 6800 XT, which is obviously a big win for Nvidia when ray tracing and DLSS are usable. So again, the RTX 3060 Ti is sandwiched in between the RTX 2080 Super and the RTX 2080. So moving on to a Wolfenstein Youngblood, and 1080p with RTX off, The RTX 3060 Ti was some way behind the RTX 3070 here. A minimum 99th percentile of 181 frames per second versus 232. So if you're gunning for maximum frame rates on your high refresh rate monitor at 1080p, then you will probably want to spend as much as possible here, because there is scaling all the way up to the RTX 3080. And with 1080p, with DLSS and ray tracing, obviously the AMD cards at the moment do not support ray tracing in this game, so we've had to lop off a couple of the cards from the testing. So 1080p, obviously you're probably not going to look at the more expensive cards realistically. I did include them on the previous test without ray tracing. But here is the RTX 3060 Ti versus the RTX 3070, and again the RTX 3070 did perform significantly better at 1080p. So again, if you're looking for an affordable graphics card, $500 or less for maximum frame rates, then you would probably want to step up to the RTX 3070. So stepping up to 1440p now and disabling ray tracing, and the RTX 3060 Ti, again a fair way behind the RTX 3070, which managed 165 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile versus 120, and obviously without DLSS or ray tracing, the RX 6800 from AMD even faster with a minimum 99th percentile of 182 frames per second. However, switching on DLSS and ray tracing, and of course ditching the AMD cards from the graphs because they don't support it, the RTX 3060 Ti, a fair way behind the RTX 3070, but for some reason, I don't know whether this is anomaly in with my test bench. It did happen again at 4K as well, so I'll have to check and see what other reviewers found in this game when ray tracing is enabled. The minimum 99th percentile was very, very low at 88 frames per second. Not sure why that is, but the average 99th percentile was kind of where we expected it to be. Slightly ahead of the RTX 2080 Super at 143 frames per second versus 130. So just not sure why that minimum 99th percentile is so low. So I had to do a bit of investigating there. So average frame rate pretty much where we expected, but the minimum 99th percentile seems to be a bit low. So I guess maybe take that result with a pinch of salt for now. Moving up to 4K and turning ray tracing off. And once again, the RTX 3060 Ti managed a reasonable 99th percentile on the minimum frame rate at 62 frames per second, but the RTX 3070 managed 96 frames per second, which is obviously a lot better if you're going to be gaming at 4K. Still a reasonable result for a $400 graphics card, but the RTX 3070 is definitely worth the extra cash here. Now, switching ray tracing on, and we've got the RTX 3060 Ti. Again, that really low minimum 99th percentile. I did rerun these tests and got the same results, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on. But the RTX 2080, much slower on the average 99th percentile, but much faster on the 99th percentile minimum. So again, not sure what's going on there, but the RTX 3070, obviously an absolute beast with a minimum 99th percentile of 110 and average of 126 frames per second at 4K with ray tracing enabled. We're mixing it up with RTX features such as DLSS and ray tracing again in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And at 1080p, we have the RTX 3060 Ti pretty much matching the RTX 3070 again. Again, I'm suspecting that there are other bottlenecks going on behind the scenes here, given that the results are pretty much the same. And it was a very, very similar result at 1440p as well. And we've got the RTX 3060 Ti pretty much matching the RTX 3070 in this game, and they also matched the RTX 2080 Super, so I suspect there's something else going on here, perhaps preferring more memory in this game or something like that, given that all the other cards seem to scale quite well all the way up to the RTX 3090. Moving on to 4K though, with RTX disabled, so no DLSS or ray tracing, and things kind of even out a bit more to kind of where you'd expect. The RTX 3060 Ti managing a minimum 99th percentile of 45 frames per second, which is significantly slower than the RTX 3070. That card again generally justifying its extra price tag, but this was one of the better results for the RTX 3060 Ti versus the RTX 2080 Super, which only managed a minimum 99th percentile of 42 frames per second. So a small win for the 3060 Ti there versus the 2080 Super. And obviously you need to spend significantly more to get noticeably higher frame rates at 4K. Now, switching DLSS and ray trace shadows on then, and the RTX 3060 Ti pretty much matched the RTX 2080 Super here, so no sort of winning formula here for Nvidia. It's kind of matching the 2080 Super, but still it's a card that was in an echelon higher last generation, so it's a pretty good result for the 3060 Ti nonetheless. An even better result for Nvidia, given the extra performance that DLSS provides, is its prowess over AMD here. So the RTX 3060 Ti managed a significantly better performance than the RX 6800 XT and RX 6800 Radeon cards. Our next game is Far Cry New Dawn, and with ultra settings at 1080p, the RTX 3060 Ti managed a very, very good result and actually bettered the AMD RX 6800. However, given the close proximity of all the graphics cards in this test, I'm inclined to say that there is probably some bottlenecking going on elsewhere in the system. The game does respond quite well to different CPUs and just generally scales with cores and frequencies. So I suspect there's some bottlenecking going on elsewhere in the system. Moving on to 1440p, again at ultra settings, and this was one of the better results for the RTX 3060 Ti against the RTX 2080 Super. Matched it here with a minimum 99th percentile of 94 and average of 128. Again, though, there's potentially a small amount of bottlenecking going on elsewhere in the system, given that the RTX 3070 performed only marginally better on the minimum 99th percentile and a fair way better on the average frame rate. So stepping up to 4K then, and the RTX 3060 Ti did slip a little bit on the minimum 99th percentile, just slipping behind the RTX 2080. The average frame rate though matching the older Nvidia card, but the RTX 2080 Super here was noticeably faster, and the RTX 3070 was faster still. Moving on to Borderlands 3 then, and at 1080p, the RTX 3060 Ti wasn't actually that far away from the RTX 3070. About a 10, 11, or actually 10 or 9 frames per second difference on the minimum 99th percentile, and about 9 frames per second difference on the average frame rate. And that's 1080p though, so obviously other system bottlenecks could be coming into play here, which looks like it's the case given the sort of lack of scaling up the graph. Moving up to 1440p though, and we've got the RTX 3060 Ti struggling a bit at the bottom of the graph. It didn't quite match the RTX 2080 Super, never mind the 2080 Super, but the RTX 3070, again, not offering a huge amount extra performance. You're only getting an extra 7 or 8 frames, and it too didn't perform that great against the RTX 2080 Super either. Switching it up to 4K then, and our last game result, and the RTX 3060 Ti performing, again, this is pretty much stereotypical for most of the other game tests, sandwiched in between the RTX 2080 Super and the RTX 2080, and generally a fair way behind the RTX 3070, which is more often than not worth the extra cash if you're gaming, especially at 4K, where it seems to edge out a more extensive lead. So in gaming overall then, that does seem to be the general trend. So the final one then is power consumption, and as expected, with one of the lower TDPs on test and slightly lower TDP than the RTX 3070, the RTX 3060 Ti drew 332 watts for the system as a whole from the wall. So what do we make of the RTX 3060 Ti then? Well, I think it's fair to say that it's a pretty big success for Nvidia. It does generally what it says on the tin. The overall consensus is that this card is sitting in between the RTX 2080 and RTX 2080 Super. It doesn't quite beat the latter in every single test. I think there's one or two benchmarks in the results that we just spoke about that where it does actually beat it. But in general, it's either a match or slightly slower. But considering that you're getting a 4K capable graphics card here for $400 or less, hopefully a bit less for the non-Founders Edition, this is obviously the Founders Edition model, that's a pretty good deal in my mind. And 4K gaming is definitely on the cards, even in the toughest games that I had here, such as Metro Exodus at 4K with ray tracing enabled. Things were still perfectly playable, you know, around 30 frames per second. And looking at frame rates much higher than that in some other games as well. So that's a great result for Nvidia. Also a potent card at 1080p gaming. Compared to other graphics cards then, obviously AMD doesn't really have a competitor at this level yet. The RX 6800 is a much more powerful, more expensive graphics card, which is designed to compete with the RTX 3070. However, when you do enable ray tracing and DLSS at the same time at 1440 and 4K, then Nvidia has a massive edge there, and the RTX 3080 Ti does actually better both of AMD's new RX graphics cards in a couple of tests, which is quite impressive if you're willing to use DLSS, of course. However, compared to the RTX 2080 Super, in general, it's a match. But what we're looking at is generally something that is going to depend on what price you can get both of these graphics cards for and whether both are available. For example, if you go on eBay now, there's probably a whole bunch of RTX 2080 Supers on there for reasonable prices. Maybe even some retailers there for people that are willing to take a punt on one of those graphics cards. But ultimately, I think if you're looking at a similar price or far or more for an RTX 2080 Super, then you're probably buying the wrong graphics card. This is the one to go for. So again, we're going to have to wait for something like an RX 6800 XT from AMD to actually compete here. The RX 5700 XT just isn't in the same league. That's an RTX 2070 Super competitor, whereas this is actually beating the 2080 Super in a lot of tests, or at least matching it. So you can't really say that the RX 5700 XT is a better card to go for, because they're just not in the same league, really. Overall, though, you know, everything about this card is generally pretty good. Very quiet in operation, as you'd expect. The 3070 was no different. Very frugal on the power consumption as well. And the only thing really that you'll need to watch is that flow-through fan, but that's only really going to be an issue if you're dealing with a small form factor case where the card is kind of flipped by a riser cable and potentially not giving that card enough room to breathe. So if you want to see more information about that, do check out my other reviews. And as I say, I've got all the other reviews for all the latest graphics card launches, as well as the latest Ryzen CPU launches in my other videos. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to have your support, and also like this video if you've found it interesting. And if you want more information as well as some graphs to look at that are not sort of in this video, you just want to flick through an article rather than listening to me ramble on in this review, then do check out my article over on Forbes as well. And that's it for me. Thanks to Nvidia for sending the sample over. Great graphics card, and we will be back soon.